My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts.
That was President Trump promising tax cuts while speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. But he needs Congress to make that happen. Joining us now to talk about the path ahead, let's bring in Illinois Congressman Sean Casten. Congressman, it's great to have you here on Yahoo Finance. I'm going to guess that you're probably opposed to some of the tax cuts efforts that have been proposed here over the last several months, and some of the policies that we've heard from President Trump. But I'm curious just in regards to the corporate tax cuts. How are you viewing just the argument that that would substantially really help U.S. competitiveness here on a global scale?
It's hard to make that argument, but let's review back to what happened during the last set of Trump tax cuts. We know it's been said many times that 80% of those tax cuts went to the wealthiest Americans. But what we also know is that when we brought in the global minimum tax, under the Biden administration, all of a sudden the U.S. became a tax haven. And so you've got a bunch of tax lawyers right now who are trying to find ways to help corporations who had intentionally domiciled their companies to recognize their taxes overseas, trying to bring them back to the United States. We already effectively are the lowest tax rate in the world. So we're not doing anything beyond that of just transferring wealth. I would also point out that under Trump's last term, Trump's IRS director told us that we were giving up nearly $1 trillion a year in revenue because we underfunded the IRS, and we were failing to collect taxes due under the current tax law. So we funded the IRS, and of course the Republicans started to pull that back. But the question of what the marginal tax rate is entirely separate from what is the tax that we actually collect. And I think what frustrates a lot of my Democratic colleagues is we can talk about this in some economic theory, but then separately, if we're not going to enforce the laws we have, this is fund the police, for goodness sake. So I think we're all very concerned about the scale of the tax cuts they want, the deficit impacts this is going to have, and the argument that this will grow the economy is simply not borne out by any macroeconomic statistics.
Well, certainly a big concern for voters is inflation. That was cited as the #1 issue for voters on exit polling this election cycle. The corporate tax cuts could be seen as an inflation hedge because without them, corporations could raise prices in order to fund their ability to pay off those taxes. What do you say about the risk of that?
So that argument presumes that inflation was limited to the United States. Inflation was global. The United States actually had slower inflation than most of the rest of the OECD. I was on a bipartisan CODEL to Europe just before the election, and every single European country was jealous of what the United States had accomplished in the wake of all the inflation that happened during COVID. And of course, they were all also saying that their voters voted against the incumbent party because everybody blames the incumbent when inflation happens. The fact that we have brought inflation down faster than the rest of the OECD, and the fact that we have a lower marginal tax rate than the rest of the OECD, means that on the margin, lowering U.S. taxes doesn't actually do anything that's anti-inflationary. The stuff that was really making a difference on the anti-inflationary side, and this is politically unpopular maybe, but it doesn't make it true. The CBO reported that one of the big reasons the U.S. got inflation under control faster than other countries was because we had such higher immigration rates to the United States. And that was allowing us to create jobs without creating as much upward wage pressure as was happening in other countries. Trump's clamping back on that as well, right? And these shouldn't be partisan. These are like objective macroeconomic facts. But taxes are not the solution to all problems and rarely are the cause of all problems, candidly.
All right, well, we don't have a ton of time, so I want to switch gears and I want to talk about energy. President Trump talking about drill, baby, drill this week. Here's what he had to say at the World Economic Forum.
We need double the energy we currently have in the United States. Can you imagine? For AI to really be as big as we want to have it, because it's it'll be very competitive with China and others. So I'm going to give emergency declarations so that they can start building them almost immediately.
And I know you just sponsored a bill aimed at improving interregional electricity transference, and this could help maintain the reliability of the grid. Does your end goal when it comes to increasing the reliability of the grid sort of align with President Trump's?
Well, it does, but we need to speak very clearly about energy. I was talking with one of my colleagues this week that if we asked an agriculture secretary what they're doing about hunger, and they said we're planting more corn, we would realize that was ducking the question. When you ask what you're doing to give people affordable, reliable energy, and we say we're going to drill, that's the same. We're shifting to the upstream end of the equation. What we need to be doing is making sure that as we have seen this surge in domestic manufacturing over the last 4 years, as we've seen the surge in AI, as we've seen electrification of the transportation sector, we need to build a much more resilient grid, and we need to make sure that that's providing ways where the lowest cost power can get to the highest demand nodes, which means building out the transmission system. That's very different from what Trump is saying, because what Trump is saying is, I want to focus on the upside, drilling assets. The oil and gas industry is increasingly an export play in the United States. The oil demand in the US is basically flat over the last decade. Oil production is up and it's moving to export. Natural gas is rising, but not rising as fast as GDP, and natural gas exports are surging. So you've got an industry that really wants to build export terminals, not provide energy for Americans. And then separately, you've got energy that can't be shipped, wind, solar, that needs transmission to get to customers. And we're seeing Trump saying that he's going to ban offshore wind. And so I think we really need to understand this, that if we are focused on a pro-consumer energy policy, then we have a lot of constructive areas we can work with the White House. If we are focused on saying we want to benefit producers at the expense of consumers, we need to be honest about that, and I think we need to stand in defense of consumers.
All right, Congressman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.